Well, welcome back to our continuing study in the book of Acts. We'll do a little review of chapter 3. Those of you who have not been with us lately know that now I'm confined to a chair, kind of, because of my legs, but it is what it is. You do what you can and let it go. In verse 1 of chapter 3, we saw Peter and John going to the temple. Now, they hadn't quite entered in yet, but they're going there, and they're going at the 9th hour of prayer. The Jews had divided up hours of prayer, and this would have been at 3 p.m. in the afternoon. And we need to remember that the hours of prayer, they were not determined by God. This was not part of God's Mosaic law to them as to when they had times of prayer. They just decided this is a good time. And if you'll remember, I made the suggestion that it probably is good for us to set a particular time in our schedules just to involve ourselves in prayer, to go to our closet, so to speak, a place where we can have quiet and peace and just really commune with God. And then in verse 2, we notice that on their way to the temple, at the gate that was called Beautiful, they find a lame man. And this man was born lame. And we pointed out that mankind many times thinks that, when you're having bad times and when you're having troubles, it's got to be because you did something bad. And we go all the way back into the patriarchal age, and we can see Job's friends accusing him of, you must have done something really bad to cause God to do these things to you. Of course, God wasn't doing it. This man was born lame, and he was found at this gate daily. We don't know the time frame of when he had started appearing there. We don't know if it was in the time of Jesus or a little after Jesus, because remember, we're looking down the road here time-wise. This could have been several years, and probably was several years after Jesus had been crucified. And that's one of the things that, when we study our Bibles, we need to realize that we read these events just bang, 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 but they didn't happen like that. Only what we need to know has been recorded for us. So he's found there daily, and he was begging for compassion. He wanted help. He needed help in order to live. He had good friends. They carried him there daily. They took the time to do that and show him that compassion, but now he's doing what he can do, and we need to commend him for that, to do what he can do. There are a lot of things a lot of us can't do. I can't speak as well as my good friend Keith Mosier. I don't have the ability to memorize like he's had all these years. But I can still do whatever I can to try and promote the Lord's kingdom, to try and teach the gospel, and so I must do that. And every one of us are like that. There are things that you and I can't do that others can. Well, do our part, and the Lord will take care of the rest. So he's begging for compassion. He's doing what he can. And Peter and John encounter him there, and they didn't ignore this man. Too often it's been my experience, I like to watch people, and sometimes go to the mall, and I like to just sit there and watch people. And people are funny. I'm one of those people. I'm funny too. But also I've noticed out on the street, if there's a beggar or something, I've watched people, in their cars, some guys begging on the side of the road, and you can see them sit there and they'll look straight at, never look at that beggar. Well, that wasn't the case with Peter and John. This lame man expected help. And folks, notice there's no indication that he had ever met Peter and John before, or that they had ever met him. Absolutely none. There is absolutely no indication that he had ever met Jesus or been in his presence. Because if he had been in Jesus' presence, he wouldn't have been lame at this time. Now, somebody says, well, why do you say that, Bob? I want you to notice a passage. In Matthew 8 and verse 16, when the even was come, and it's talking about Jesus and the events of teaching that he was involved in, they brought unto him many that were possessed with demons. I'm reading it like it should be instead of devils. And he cast out the spirits with his word. He cast these demons out and healed all that were sick. There is never an indication in anything we read about Jesus in the Gospels that any sick person stayed sick after Jesus was in their presence. And when we look at a passage like this, it indicates that he didn't hold back from healing every single person who needed it, who came around it, whether it was casting out in that day and time of demons, or whether it was to heal them of some disease or to take care of some need. I would maintain that this lame man, if he had ever been in the presence of Jesus, would not have been lame on this occasion. In verse 6, we saw that Peter told him, he said, have no money. We talked about the fact that this would have probably been very disappointing to this lame man at that time, because that's what he's asking for, help, material things. Didn't necessarily have to be money, it could have been food. Give him something to help him, material things to help him so that he could live. And we notice that Peter commanded this man to get up and walk. That would have been an astounding statement, wouldn't it? What if you were there? Put yourself in his position. If you had been there, laying there lame from your mother's womb, never been able to walk, had no idea what it was like to be able to walk, had no idea how to move your limbs to do it, and you're expecting for help, and you hear this man say, hey, look at us. And then he says, I don't have any money. But then he says, get up and walk. What would you have thought? And you didn't expect this. And notice that Peter didn't do this by his own authority. He was doing this by the authority of Jesus Christ, by the authority of Jesus of Nazareth. The name Jesus was very common in that day and time. So if he'd have just said, by the authority of Jesus, what does that mean? Who is this Jesus that I'm supposed to get up and walk according to the authority that's been invested in you? But he clarifies it, he specifies, Jesus of Nazareth. And that would have meant something. They would have known, Jesus had been called that Nazarene. Jesus had been identified as that Jesus who is from Nazareth. That heretic that's trying to get people to stop following Moses. And in verse 7, we saw that Peter helped him stand. Now, have you thought about that for a moment? Because we're going to notice something that was said in the text that is quite interesting. Peter helped him to stand. He reached out his hand and obviously took him by the hand and helped him to get up. And the Bible shows us that his feet and ankle bones were made, the original word in that text shows solid. So in other words, whatever it was that was causing him not to be able to walk, to be lame, had to do with the bones in his ankles and his feet. They had to be made solid in order for him to be able to stand. And we also talked about all the other things that would have had to have taken place in order for him to be able to stand. The muscles, nerves, everything having to be built up and to work right. This man had no faith to be healed. He wasn't looking for healing. He was looking for material things. And Peter and John are the ones who had to have the faith. They had to be able to believe, and we emphasize that by looking at the account of the man whose son was called a lunatic, probably epilepsy, and the apostles should have been able to heal him, take this epilepsy away, but they couldn't. And when they asked Jesus about it, we remember that Jesus told them, it's because of your lack of faith. For a person to be miraculously healed, the faith that's required is on the part of the one who's doing the healing, not on the person. And yet today, these fake healers, they always blame it on the person who has the malady, not the one who supposedly can heal. And that brings us to where we left off last week, and I want you to notice something. I alluded to this earlier in verse 7. In verse 8 he says, and he leaping up stood and walked and entered with them into the temple, walking and leaping and praising God. Leaping up. The original word means to spring forth, to leap up. But wait a minute, we notice that Peter had to reach down and help him get on his feet, didn't he? So what is this talking about? It indicates that he was jumping after he was standing. Peter helped him to get on his feet, and the man immediately began jumping around. And this is indicated by the use of the same word twice in this verse. Leaping. For the first time in his life, I mean, this would be hard for you and I to understand, to imagine. For the first time in his life, he could stand up. For the first time in his life, he could jump, he could walk. And that's pretty hard for us to understand. Then shall the lame leap as a hart, and the tongue of the dumb sing. For in the wilderness shall waters break out, and streams in the desert. The prophets had been told that this kind of thing was going to be taking place. I don't know about you. I know that William likes to hunt or has hunted. But when I hunted deer, I loved to just watch the deer sometimes. Sometimes I could have a whole herd go by and never take a shot, never get me some meat. Because I just enjoyed watching them. I enjoyed watching their habits. And I love to see it when all of a sudden maybe something scared them and boy, they jumped. I have seen deer jump over. Are you ready for this? You know those security fences that they put around industries that are about 8 feet tall? I have seen a deer standing there get scared and jump over that fence. I've seen it at General Motors when I worked there a long time ago. It's amazing to watch them and what they can do. And you know, they don't see very well up close. In fact, they don't see very well at all. People say, well, wait a minute. No, they see movement. But as to what that object is, if you go out and you stand perfectly still, that deer will look at you and then try to make a movement to see if you'll move. And they'll do it several times. And finally, if you just stand there and don't move, they'll think you're a bush or something. Doesn't bother them a bit. Notice that the lame man now enters into the temple with them. And remember, all of these people, or I shouldn't say all of them, but a lot of these people would have never seen this man moving before. They would have seen him lame. Here's the first time that this man is allowed to enter the temple complex. He couldn't go in before. Why? Because of his lameness. Look at Psalm 42 and verse 4 with me for a moment. I believe this is David that is talking about this. And he says, when I remember these things, I pour out my soul in me. Well, why was he pouring out his soul? It indicates a tremendous amount of worship that he feels, amount of thankfulness. For I had gone with a multitude. I went with them to the house of God with the voice of joy and praise, with a multitude that kept holy day. Why did David say that? Because generations of his family were not allowed to go in. And he was that number, and I'm trying desperately in my mind, I can't remember the number, but he was now that generation which was allowed to go in. This really meant something to him. I was glad when they said unto me, let us go into the house of the Lord, the house of Jehovah, the I Am. And that causes me to wonder, do we feel the same way? Even though we're not under the same restraints that the generations of his family had been in before this, but should we not feel joy when we approach, when we drive down the road and we see this building and think, hey, I'm about to go in and be with my brethren. I'm about to go in before the Lord. I'm about to go into his house. Praising God. Well, we can understand why this man was praising God. He was able to do something he'd never been able to do. It wasn't just walking. It wasn't just being able to leap with joy. It was being able to go into this place that he'd been forbidden to go into for so many long years. He knew who to praise. He didn't praise Peter. He wasn't doing that. He was praising Jehovah. He was praising the great I Am. You know, we sing that song sometimes, the great I Am. And that's really the name of God. I am. He knew only God could be responsible for his healing. He understood that. And he noted the difference. When we think about this, we should note the difference between him and the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin attributed the miracle to Peter and John, as we're going to see in chapter 4 and verse 16. They didn't attribute it to God. They attributed it to these men. But this man who was healed, he knew who to praise, the God of heaven, the great I Am. And then when we look at verses 9 and 10, we see that all the people saw him walking and praising God. And they knew that it was he which sat at alms at the beautiful gate of the temple. And they were filled with wonder and amazement at that which had happened unto him. Notice the reaction of the people. They had no doubt about this man's identity. They had no doubt that this is the man who did not have the ability to get up and walk, had to be carried to the temple daily so that he could be laid at this gate or by this gate in order to receive alms that he had to beg for. And they were filled. The word filled there is interesting. If I understand the tenses, etc., that go with this word, it is a word that means filled to overflowing. Not just filled, but filled to overflowing. They didn't know what to think about this. And they were filled with wonder and amazement. I think you and I would have been the same way if it was somebody we absolutely knew couldn't do something, and now instantaneously they're allowed to do it. They can do it. Wonder, to render immovable. See the idea behind this word? Amazement. They were so astonished at what's going on that they didn't know what to think. They didn't know what to do. They didn't know what to say. The word amazement means thrown into a state of blended fear and wonderment. If we had seen something like this, if we had seen Jesus raise someone from the dead, might not it cause fear in us? Because, if he can do this, what else can he do? We'd have to start realizing if he can do this, there's nothing he can't do. Caused them a blended fear and amazement. And there was an understanding. Something they sincerely, absolutely understood. They had seen something done which no normal man by himself could possibly do. And so it caused the people to do some thinking. No doubt they were talking to each other and expressing, did we really just see what we saw? Where's the power? How did this happen? What else would God do? What else could he do with these men? Notice again the difference between what these disciples did and what so-called miracle workers do today. In our society, there are a lot of folks that claim that they can do miracles, but they're almost always with regard to someone or something that could not be seen or verified by those that they're dealing with, those they're telling about this miracle that was done. It's almost always, well, I saw down in Mississippi a man who raised somebody from the dead, or a man who healed someone with blindness, or whatever the claim is. Or I saw out in California that, the audience didn't see it. What God did through Peter could easily be confirmed. Why? Because they had daily seen this man, they knew who he was, and now they were literally seeing him do something he couldn't do before. Jump over to Acts 4 with me just for a moment in verse 16. What shall we do to these men? For that indeed a notable miracle hath been done by them, is manifest in all them that dwell in Jerusalem, and we cannot deny it. Even the enemies of Jesus, who had called for his death, the enemies of these apostles, who were trying the best they could to stop them from teaching about this Jesus, from proclaiming the gospel, they couldn't deny that a miracle had been done. Now, they attributed it to the wrong person. Why? That's easy to figure out. Because they didn't want to recognize Jesus. They didn't want to sit back and say, well, now, Jesus did this. God is the one who did this. No, they attributed it to Peter and John. And as the lame man which was healed held Peter and John, all the people ran together unto them in the porch that is called Solomon's, greatly wondering. The lame man which was healed held Peter and John. What if you had some terrible disease? Let's say cancer. You had a terrible cancer. What would you do when the doctor who operated on you came back and told you they got it all? If you could, if you weren't so sore from the operation, what would you do? Do you think you wouldn't profoundly thank him for what he'd done for you? If possible, hugged him? What if a year later, after the exam that usually takes place after something like that, they come back after running all the tests, and he has you in his office, and he says, you're free of cancer? What kind of emotions do you think you'd have? The lame man does what he could. He's holding, he's hugging Peter and John. Why? Was it a sense of dependency? He's holding on to them to help him stand up? No. He's already been leaping around, walking, praising God. So he knows that he doesn't have to lean on them to be able to stand up. It's gratitude. It's gratitude for what has been done for him as he praises the one whom he knows is actually the one who allowed these men to heal him. And notice what the people are doing. These people that are amazed, and appears they've overcome some of that amazement, that dumbification, so to speak, that they didn't know what to say, what to do. And they're all running together. The word's spreading. The word's spreading about what had been done. And it says they ran together to run along with others. They're all moving to one place. Well, where's this place? The news was spreading. They no longer were speechless. And something astounding had happened. When you and I hear about something astounding happening, what do we usually do if we're nearby? If we're anywhere near that place? Oh, we want to see it for ourselves, don't we? That's why we have, you're going down the highway and all of a sudden the traffic starts slowing down. And you're wondering, why? Oh, it must have been an accident. Well, we might get through here someday. And then as traffic inches along, you get up and you see on the other side of a divided highway, there has indeed been an accident. Nothing on your side. There's no pieces of metal over on your side that need to be avoided. And no car crossed over and has been blocking the road. No, it's all on the other side. We call them rubberneckers, don't we? Why is everybody slowing down? They don't have to. It's because they want to see what happened. Maybe try to figure it out in their mind. What happened? Human nature says, I want to see it for myself. In the porch that's called Solomon's, it's believed to be a part of the foundation of the original temple that was built by Solomon. Now remember, that temple that Solomon built had been destroyed by the Babylonians. It had been rebuilt in the time of Nehemiah, but it was pitiful in comparison to the time of Solomon, the temple that he'd built. It wasn't as grand, it wasn't as beautiful, it wasn't as big. And this porch is called Solomon's. When Herod then rebuilt the temple, it became a thing of majesty. In fact, some people considered it to be what we might call one of the 7 wonders of the world. It was so beautiful and so magnificent that when Titus had circled the city of Jerusalem in 70 A.D., that he told his soldiers, do not destroy the temple. They wanted it kept. They wanted it kept, quote, as a trophy, so to speak. It was so magnificent and so beautiful. Of course, you remember your history if you've studied it. The soldiers got so carried away because of their anger at the citizens of Jerusalem for causing them to be in this siege mode for so long that once they started burning the city, they didn't stop. They burned the temple. And Josephus tells us, Josephus the historian who lived during this time, that the fires caused the gold that plated the interior of the temple to melt, literally getting down between these tight creases, between these mammoth boulders, as we might call them, building blocks, and would cause the soldiers then literally to rip the temple apart to get to the gold that had seeped down between the cracks. But at Solomon's porch, which is believed to have been a part of the original foundation of Solomon's temple, where this is taking place. It's believed to have been about 400 cubits long. That's about 600 feet. And it was the crowd was greatly wondering as they gathered at this place, a specific place. This gave the apostles a wonderful opportunity. I've often said, wouldn't it be wonderful if I could stand in the middle of the University of Michigan's football field and preach to that crowd? Wouldn't that be an amazing thing? Number one, it'd be amazing to let me do it. And number two, it would be amazing to be able to have a crowd like that listening. Over 120,000 people listening to the gospel. They've got a crowd. It's been drawn because of the amazement of what's been done with the lame man, and they use that opportunity. In verse 12, and when Peter saw it, he answered unto the people, Ye men of Israel, why marvel ye at this? Or why look ye so earnestly on us, as though by our own power or holiness that we made this man to walk? Notice several things here. First of all, notice something about the people. They're marveling. To be held in wonderment, to be in admiration. They know something amazing's happened. And they know that however this was done, it was an act that needed to be admired by them. But also notice that they're apparently attributing this to Peter and to John. Now, we don't see the exact words, but we know by what Peter and John said that they were indeed attributing this miracle to Peter and John. We find a similar incident in Acts chapter 14, don't we? Here, again, a lame man was healed. And people were attributing it to Paul and Barnabas. Now imagine this. Here they are in this European city. A miracle has been done, and they are attributing it to Paul and Barnabas. And in fact, they said, you've got to be gods. They were proclaiming them to be Mercury and Jupiter. Mercury, of course, to Paul, and Jupiter to Barnabas. So Peter and John say, why are you looking on us so earnestly, so intently? Look at the humility that was exhibited by Peter and John. You know, today, if someone had done something like this, I doubt very seriously you'd see a lot of humility, unless they were truly the servant of God. And of course, they couldn't have done it if they weren't the servant of God. But I can't help but think about some preachers of the gospel that I know of who exult in being glorified because of their speaking ability or some other ability, their writing ability, or whatever it is. And I know you've seen it too. You've seen people who are just like that. Preachers who take credit when we shouldn't take any credit for anything that we do. The glory for whatever you and I may be able to accomplish belongs to God. He gave us the ability to think and to reason, to be able maybe to preach as well as we do. He gave us the ability to be able to remember events and things that we've seen that may be able to be used as illustrations to illustrate some point of God's Word. You and I, we should never take personal credit for what God has done through us. They didn't take any credit for themselves. Instead, they pointed directly to God. He's the one who did this. We didn't do it. We weren't able to do it because we innately had the ability to do this. They were simply instruments that were being used by God And folks, you and I as Christians, that's how we should look at ourselves. We are an instrument, no different than a pen that the ink flows out of on a piece of paper. It has to have someone guiding it in order to be able to do that. You and I have to be able to be guided by our Maker to do whatever it is that He allows us to do in service to Him. Look at verse 13. The God of Abraham and of Isaac and of Jacob. I love that formula. It is seen so many times in both the Old Testament and the New Testament. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The God of Abraham and of Isaac and of Jacob, the God of our fathers, hath glorified His Son Jesus, whom ye delivered up and denied Him in the presence of Pilate when he was determined to let Him go. The God of our father Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. Oh, and not just their God, but the God of our fathers, our ancestors. The God who has been the same all of this time. The Jews love to talk about their ancestors. That's why it was so important when Jerusalem was destroyed that all of the genealogical records were destroyed when the temple was burned to the ground. Those genealogical records were used as a source of bragging about, oh, I'm related to such. You ever seen somebody do that today? I know somebody in this room says, you know, I'm related to General Grant. Okay, so what? You know, that and now about $2 will buy you a cup of coffee. I could sit back and say, I'm related to John Knox, the great reformer, and I am. So what? Doesn't matter what my grandparents did. Doesn't matter what some ancient relative of mine did. What matters is what I do. The Jews were like that only to the point of trying to glorify themselves. Well, I'm special because I'm related to so-and-so. Well, we're all related to Adam, aren't we? I guess that makes all of us special. And in a sense it does, but not in the way they used it. They were highly involved in these genealogies, and they placed so much importance on who they were related to, who they were direct descendants of. But what really mattered was who they were, and what they were, and the same thing's true of us. The only thing that really matters is who I am and what I am. Am I a Christian? What I am? Am I one who serves God and tries to serve Him faithfully? That's all that really matters. So what did God, the God of their fathers, do? He said, the God of our fathers glorified His Son, Jesus. And notice, He puts all glory in the hands of God. He's actually saying, I am a descendant of the Father because I am serving Him. And who we should be glorifying is not me and John. It's God who glorified His. We're supposed to be glorifying Jesus. To cause dignity and worth of some person to be held or manifest and acknowledged. And He lays a charge at him. You didn't do that. You didn't glorify Jesus. God did. God glorified His Son, and you should have too. Instead, you denied Him. Consider if you'd been there that day. Consider if you had been one of those Jews who had stood before Pilate and demanded that Jesus be crucified, because you and your Jewish leaders had given him into the hands of the Romans. How might you have felt when in essence a charge is being laid against you that you delivered him and denied him and demanded that he be put to death, the Son of God, God himself? You denied him. That original word, denied, means to reject, to refuse something offered. Now there's interesting. Not just to reject, but to refuse something that was offered. Jesus had been offered to them as their Messiah, as the sacrifice that had to be made in order to have their sins taken away. And you refused that one who was offered to you to fulfill that role. You denied him in the presence of Pilate when he was determined to let him go. Here's a pagan ruler. He knew Jesus was innocent. He proclaimed. He didn't just know that Jesus was innocent. He proclaimed it. He knew why Jesus had been delivered, for envy. God's people, on the other hand, cried out, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" Here's a pagan who had really not very much knowledge, at the very least, of this Hebrew religion, saying he's innocent. He hadn't done anything. And here are God's people, on the other hand, who should have known who he was by the prophets and what they said about him, this one who was coming. And now he's among them. He has exhibited all the things, fulfilled the things the prophets said about him, and they denied him. We'll come back next week to verse 14 and 15.